My parents divorced when I started college. From my earliest memories, their relationship had been cold, and we lived as a family only in appearance. My father, who was popular with women, had married my mother because of an unplanned pregnancy. His favorite phrase was, "If it weren't for the baby, I wouldn't have had to get married." He didn't even try to hide his affairs. As for my mother, she resented having to drop out of college and become a housewife due to her pregnancy, as insisted upon by her parents. Whenever my father had an affair, she would cry and scream, pushing me away in the process. That's how I grew up emotionally detached. So when my parents finally divorced, I thought it was for the best. I explained that if they gave me 4 years' worth of college tuition and half of my living expenses up front, I would be independent from then on. My father left to be with his new wife and children. My mother went abroad. Now I'm 34, living with my husband, who's 4 years older than me, and our 3-year-old daughter. My husband was originally my senior colleague at work. Given my troubled past, I didn't expect our relationship to last. However, he treated me as an equal, and for the first time, I understood what it meant to love someone. When he proposed, I was happy, but fear overshadowed my joy. However, his family quickly erased my worries. His family consists of his parents and a sister who's my age. His father is actually his stepfather. When I confessed that neither of my parents would likely attend our wedding and that I was estranged from both sides of my family, my sister-in-law cheerfully said, "Well then, I could walk you down the aisle." My mother-in-law added, "The formalities don't matter. What's important to me is my son's happiness." So we got married. 3 years into our marriage, our daughter was born. During this time, my husband changed jobs and started a business with my sister-in-law's friend. He's now busy as the co-CEO of a travel company. At my in-law's suggestion, I started helping with accounting at my father-in-law's company. The company was founded with his previous wife, who had passed away from illness. Having no children of his own, my father-in-law threw himself into managing the company as his late wife's legacy. The company has grown to own its own building in Tokyo. As a family member of the president, I worked diligently without taking advantage of my position. My father-in-law had warned me that getting a business off the ground would be challenging. So I took care of everything at home, telling my husband, "We're fine, just take care of yourself." He would reply, "Sorry, I'll be careful about my health." The company grew rapidly. My husband started coming home later and later. We used to visit his parents once a month, but those visits almost stopped. I wished he would visit more, especially after learning that my mother-in-law had become seriously ill. After my husband and sister-in-law's biological father died in an accident, their mother had raised them alone while running a restaurant. She later married my father-in-law. When diagnosed, she immediately chose palliative care. My father-in-law tried to convince her to try surgery, but she ultimately said, "Please let me decide how to spend my remaining time," and he had to accept her decision. When I told my husband, he just said, "If Mom made her decision, neither I nor my sister have any right to interfere." I thought he was respecting his mother's wishes, but he became reluctant to visit her during her home care. His sister also brushed it off. Every time I visit with our daughter, my mother-in-law glances behind us, clearly checking if my husband has come. It breaks my heart. My father-in-law looks pained too. When our daughter innocently said, "Daddy doesn't play with me anymore," my mother-in-law looked sad and replied, "Oh my, what a naughty daddy. You'll have to scold him next time you see him." It makes me sad too. One night, my father-in-law called to say my mother-in-law's condition had suddenly worsened and she'd been rushed to the hospital. I quickly woke our daughter and messaged my husband, but he didn't read it. Even after rushing to the hospital by taxi, only my father-in-law was there. I tried calling the company but only got voicemail, increasing my anxiety. Then the doctor informed us that my mother-in-law had passed away. 2 hours after returning home with my mother-in-law's body, my husband and his sister finally rushed in. By then, many employees from my father-in-law's company had already arrived to help and pay respects. Everyone gave cold looks to my husband, who was clearly hungover with messy hair, and his sister in her flashy dress. I couldn't bring myself to speak to them either. When they tried to make excuses, my angry father-in-law coldly said, "Enough. I don't want to shout in front of your mother. Keep your lies to yourself." Intimidated by the surrounding stares, they huddled in a corner of the room. My mother-in-law had apparently arranged her funeral details with a funeral home in advance. Many people who received the news came to pay their respects, showing how well respected she was. Throughout this time, my husband and his sister just sat there, no longer seeming to care about others' stares. 10 days after the funeral, on my day off, I received an express mail. The sender was a law firm. Inside were a sealed letter and a note on the law firm's letterhead saying they were sending this letter as requested by my mother-in-law, to be delivered to her daughter-in-law 10 days after her death. The note asked me to read it without letting the children know, and included an address. Taking the enclosed key, I hurried to the specified address with my daughter. What I found there was completely unexpected. Later, on the day of my mother-in-law's memorial service and interment, my father-in-law asked me, my husband, his sister, and our daughter to come to the house. As we sat in the living room, my father-in-law made a phone call, and soon 2 men in suits entered. My husband and his sister looked puzzled but brightened when the men presented their business cards from the law firm. The lawyers faced us all and announced, "We will now read the deceased's will," adding, "Please note that this is a legally valid will." My mother-in-law's assets included a building she had purchased, the rights to the restaurant business, and savings. She wanted the savings to go to my father-in-law, while the building, restaurant rights, and a $100,000 life insurance policy would go to my husband and his sister. The savings amounted to about $200,000, but the building's value far exceeded that. Normally, inheritance rights would give half to my father-in-law and the other half split between my husband and his sister. They kept glancing at my father-in-law, but when he said, "I have no objections," they visibly relaxed and signed the inheritance agreement. When we moved on to discussing the distribution of my mother-in-law's personal belongings, my sister-in-law, excited about getting the building, said, "What, Mom's personal things? You mean antiques and kimonos? I don't want those old-fashioned things." When I asked if I could have them to pass down to my daughter as mementos, they readily agreed. Since lawyers were present, I had them draw up a consent form allowing me, an outsider, to receive the personal items, and got signatures from all 3 family members. While my husband and his sister laughed at how formal this seemed, I stopped them as they were about to leave and presented divorce papers to my husband. He was shocked to receive divorce papers from me, especially in this setting. I hired a private investigator and have evidence of your ongoing affair with your sister's friend, your business co-owner, I said. My demands are sole custody of our daughter, compensation, and child support paid in full. I don't need any division of assets. When I presented the calculated compensation and child support figures along with the divorce agreement, prepared by my lawyer, he suddenly laughed and said, "Well, if you knew all along, we didn't need to put on an act." His sister joined in, "Right? You're quite cunning yourself." It was quite troublesome being my brother's accomplice in his affair. The 2 of them kept laughing hysterically for some reason. Ignoring them, the lawyer urged them to sign, which they did triumphantly, promising to transfer the money the next day. I informed them that I had already moved important items from our apartment to another location, and they could dispose of whatever was left when they cleared out the room. When I asked about visitation rights for our daughter, my husband said, "Since there's no need to hide it anymore, I'll tell you, my girlfriend is expecting my child soon. So it's probably best to say goodbye to our daughter now," he said with a smirk. I was about to explode with anger, but my father-in-law calmly suggested, "Then we should add that to the agreement and get their signatures," which I did. My husband and his sister stood up. "Well, goodbye. Be good and listen to your mom," he said, waving as he left without looking back. As I hugged our confused daughter tightly, my father-in-law gently patted my head. After confirming the promised compensation and child support had been transferred, I submitted the divorce papers. When I was about to rent an apartment for my daughter and me, my father-in-law said, "Though we have no legal ties anymore, would you 2 like to live here with me? You won't have to pay rent." Indeed, this would minimize stress and environmental changes for our daughter. Though I hesitated to impose, we agreed that I would handle the housework in lieu of rent. My daughter is delighted to live with her beloved grandpa, and my father-in-law smiles, saying, "I'm sure my wife is happy somewhere, hearing our granddaughter's laughter in this house." I do sometimes feel my mother-in-law's presence watching over us. Meanwhile, my ex-husband and former sister-in-law quickly sold the restaurant management rights to the respective store managers and eagerly awaited the building's title transfer. However, when they started the process, they discovered the building had a revolving mortgage, which my late mother-in-law had used to secure business expansion funds. Furthermore, the current creditor wasn't the original bank but a suspicious finance company. My mother-in-law had stopped making payments about 6 months before her death. If they wanted to sell the building as planned, they would need to negotiate repayment terms with the finance company and complete complex procedures. Their travel company, which had appeared successful, was actually operating at a loss due to the executives' loose financial management. They couldn't arrange the necessary funds. When loan sharks, fraudsters, and aggressive real estate developers started circling, my ex-husband and his sister lost their rights to the building, and their travel company went bankrupt. His girlfriend abandoned him. The $100,000 life insurance money was immediately used to repay loans for the divorce settlement and child support, and they ended up with nothing. No, less than nothing, they were in debt. Shunned by everyone and fallen from grace, they came to this house seeking help from my father-in-law. However, my father-in-law told them, "I never legally adopted you, and our connection ended when my wife died. We're not related, so don't come back." I added, "We're strangers now that we're divorced. You renounced your visitation rights as her father, so we have no business with you." They looked desperate. Still, his sister persisted, saying, "Then give back Mom's belongings you took. We could at least sell those for something." When I brought them out and told them to take what they wanted, they eagerly started grabbing things. I showed them my mother-in-law's stamp album too, but they said, "We don't want such childish things," and left with her other belongings. Actually, the most valuable items were the stamps in that album. Following the memo in the album, I found a storage unit. Using the key, I opened it to find a small cash box containing evidence of my ex-husband's affair from the investigation company, one stamp, and a long letter. My mother-in-law had intuited that my ex-husband and his sister's business was fragile, partly due to his affair. When she realized she didn't have long to live, her first concern was for my daughter and me, who had nowhere else to turn. Besides, I can't forgive my children's betrayal. My late husband, their father, repeatedly had affairs, and I cried countless times because of it, she wrote. For my children to do the same thing as their father, knowing how much it hurt me. She arranged to transfer her assets to me and my daughter after her death, while simultaneously getting revenge on her children by setting up a mortgage with a notoriously predatory finance company. She used that money to win an auction for a rare stamp coveted by worldwide collectors. She deliberately stopped paying back the loan secured by the building. I considered putting this stamp in a bank safety deposit box, but it might be frozen when I die, and the children might find it, she wrote. I hope you're reading this letter, that you have this stamp, and that you and my granddaughter will live happily. I couldn't stop crying after reading the letter that ended this way. When I showed the letter to my father-in-law, it turned out my mother-in-law had arranged for him to receive a similar letter. Knowing everything, my father-in-law decided to participate in the plan for my mother-in-law's sake, and we carried out everything exactly as she had envisioned. While greeting my mother-in-law's memorial altar with my daughter, I silently said, "Mother, you will always be my irreplaceable mother-in-law." "Come on, we'll be late," said my father-in-law, his eyes also moist. I turned back to the altar one more time and called out loud,